Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Tria. It's really great to hear about your experiences with PowerShift 2009 and where we're at here today and outcomes to come. Well, next up, who should I pick? I think we're going to go with Amara. She's holding the mic. She's ready. Okay, Amara, I was thinking about this question long and hard for you. And just reflecting on your experiences, I was hoping that you could think of something that the participants here tonight that are participating in PowerShift throughout the weekend should keep in mind throughout the weekend. What are those top tips? What should we keep in mind?
So I've also been thinking about this long and hard because I've been working on PowerShift since January and doing a lot of reflection on what happened in 2009. And I have a two-part answer. The first is that often the most profound learning comes out of unexpected and often uncomfortable situations. This is building a little bit on what Tria said, and so I'm going to tell a story which I think is important mostly because for everybody who was there in 2009, it was a deeply transformative experience that affected us in very different ways, but that ultimately led to a stronger movement. So exactly 3 years ago today, actually, a bunch of us were in the House of Commons for Lobby Day. We had gone to see our MPs to tell them that we wanted them to pass the Climate Change Accountability Act. Actually, I'm curious about this. Who was here in 2009?
Woo!
Cool. Were any of you there that day in the House of Commons? Cool. Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. So yeah, we had gone to see our MPs to talk about the Climate Change Accountability Act, why we cared about climate justice. And then later that day, we went to question period to see if they would raise the issues we had addressed in our meetings. No one said anything. There were a bunch of people in suits bickering and not talking about our future at all. And so a few people had gone in and decided to disrupt the question period, but what happened was actually completely unexpected. A couple of people stood up and said, shut down the tar sands, respect the Treaty on Indigenous Rights, pass Bill C-311. But after they were escorted out, someone stood up and started a call and response that led to 100 people standing up in the House of Commons and having their voices heard because our voices hadn't been heard through the political system. And so everyone I've talked to who was at PowerShift 2009 calls this a deeply transformative experience. And maybe this is kind of weird to share on stage, but that was not long after I started organizing, and I left sobbing. It was a really uncomfortable experience for me, mostly because it was so unexpected. And I was standing outside questioning everything I had worked for to make PowerShift happen. And that was the moment that I really started to think about what is an effective way to make change. So what I'm trying to say is that if you find yourselves in uncomfortable situations, not necessarily exactly like that one, challenge yourself to think about it, push through it, because we really need to have these moments where we're learning together, and we need to push through them so that we can grow as a movement and deepen our analysis and deepen our connections. And I promise I'll keep the second one shorter. But the second thing is that what happens at PowerShift does not stay at PowerShift.
Really? Is that true?
Sorry? Don't let what happens here stay here. Take it back home. Tria was talking about what's been happening this week. On Wednesday, 2 days ago, there were 68 actions across BC with almost 7,000 people participating.
Woo!
Yeah, right? And I know Clay and Bridge are going to talk about some of the other things that have happened this week, but this has been a really inspiring week for the climate movement. And so make connections this weekend. Take them back to your communities. Let's make sure that we are well networked so that when we go back and organize locally and build strong groups locally that are organizing around local struggles, we also have the capacity to come together and organize nationally, because that's what we need. So, actually, this is kind of awkward. What happens at PowerShift doesn't stay at PowerShift. What happens at PowerShift okay, here you go, man.
Thank you for that advice and tidbits and history, Amara. That was great. And yeah, I think we'll all be keeping that in mind and bringing things back to our communities. Thank you for sharing that, Amara. Well, Ben, last but not least on our panel here, I have a question for you that I want you to think deep and hard about. Okay, are you ready for it? what do you see is the biggest opportunity for the advancement of the youth climate movement?
I think it's catchy memes.
Oh my God, lolcats everywhere.
The first rule of PowerShift is you do talk about PowerShift. No, actually, I want to go back to 2006, actually, before PowerShift 2009, to the founding of the Canadian Youth Climate Coalition, which was really when I began to get involved in this youth climate movement. And at the time, being a young Native man, this was a particularly movement that didn't really reflect where I came from, and what I was really interested in. And I saw that as a particular challenge, for my getting involved, for a lot of other young people to get involved in this movement. And I think that a lot of the successes that we've had have been in the way that we've tried to confront some of those challenges, in the ways that we've tried to really build this movement, make this a more open and inclusive movement, a lot of which, you're seeing reflected here today, to the point where, the first meeting of this Canadian Youth Climate Coalition, of youth groups from across the country that wanted to take action on climate change, only had a few dozen people there. And now, look around this room. I mean, this is amazing. There's hundreds and hundreds of people here, many more people still waiting to get in, many more people who are going to show up tomorrow. I think this is a tremendous success for our movement, which is really based on the way that this movement has been able to capitalize on the lessons of the environmental justice principles, and the way that we've been able to make this movement about more than just the environment, but to make it about social justice, to make it about human rights, to make it about indigenous rights, to make it about feminism, to make it about social justice, to make it about anti-poverty, to really open and expand this movement in ways that, hadn't really been done before with the environmental movement. And still challenges, I think, a lot of the other groups, as Amara alluded to, in a way that, really forces them to take these kind of things seriously. But I would say also at the same time, we've come a long way, but there's still a tremendous amount of work to be done yet. And I think that's the real lesson here. Moving forward from PowerShift, there's still so much that we have to do to really expand this movement, to really make this the movement that we need. Not just to bring more people in, not just to bring in perspectives of different communities, but to really recognize that this is the only way that we're going to win. That this is the only way that we're going to be able to build a movement that can properly challenge and transform the economic and political and colonial institutions that are the prime reason for the climate crisis, for the environmental crises, for the energy crisis, for the food and water crisis that we're seeing in Canada and everywhere around the world. And it's only in that matter that we're going to be able to build solid and serious solutions that really respect and reflect all of the different histories, all the different communities, all the different identities and realities that we all bring to this movement and can all bring to this movement. So basically that. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you. Well, I'd like to take this moment to give all of our panelists for the first and only What's Your Climate Movement a round of applause. A big round of applause. Thank you all. And I would highly encourage them all to show their climate movement as they leave stage. So, what's your climate movement? Yeah, the soundtrack.
It's a pun.
Bum, 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 bum,